In this section, we're going to cover some of the troubleshooting aspects of Odyssey with some of the more common issues you might run into, including why people aren't getting through a door, panel and server communications, input, output, and reader troubleshooting, along with some additional resources and further reading. For access denied troubleshooting, it's worth noting that a user can be denied access to a door for various reasons. Thankfully, the access denied message will usually steer you in the right direction, and you'll be able to see that message in the live notifications on the sidebar or in the notifications report or any historical report. Let's go over some of the common access denied messages and some of the clues you might need to look up why they're not getting in. The first one is access denied due to invalid card or PIN. You'll typically see this if it's a brand new card or a brand new user who has no access to this door at all since they're a brand new user. The other reason you might see this if it fills in the first and last name like we see here would be if the user is not in any access privilege groups or if the user record is disabled or the credential itself is disabled. And finally, the most common reason we see this message is that the user was added, but the door panels have not been updated yet. So don't forget to click that Update Panels button. The next most common reason is access denied due to invalid schedule. This basically is saying that there's an issue with the user or the door schedule. For example, if a user is a member of an access privilege group who's only allowed in 9 to 5, but they try the card at 6 p.m. or at 7 a.m., then you'll notice they'll get that exact same message. Again, basically saying, I know who you are, but you're not allowed in right now. The other common reason you might see this is if the door schedule doesn't match the type of credential that they're attempting at the door. For example, a door could be in PIN mode, and if you try a card on a door in PIN mode, it will throw you the invalid schedule access denied message. You would also see this if the door mode is in lockdown and the user is not a supervisor or a master. The next couple access denied messages aren't as common and are thankfully fairly obvious. Access denied due to user's crisis level below the door's current crisis level. You may see this if you're using the crisis level feature, which is a lockdown type feature to restrict who is allowed through a door based on the crisis level assigned in their profile. For example, if I had a door that was in code red, but the user only had code yellow, I would get the same access denied message. If you ever find the door is unintentionally in a crisis level, you can use the override menu on the top of the screen and switch that door back to follow schedule. The last common access denied message is due to the start or expiry date on that credential. Again, fairly straightforward, basically telling you that the current date is outside the window of their start and expiry date. This will be either on the user profile, but it could also be on the access privilege groups, which do also support expiry dates. Whenever I am troubleshooting an access denied message, I'll usually flow through the user. I'll of course check the message first to give me an idea of what to look for. Otherwise, I'm going to look at the user record, check if they're disabled, check if their credentials are disabled. Then I'll move on over to the access privilege groups they're a member of, start checking the groups to see if those groups do indeed give them access to those doors. And if that all clears out, then I'll usually check the system overview screen next to see the live mode of the door in case it's something like the door being in lockdown or being in pin mode instead of card mode. For communication troubleshooting on Odyssey, we'll have a few sections here to go over. For example, why would a panel not connect to the software in the first place? What do the different panel disconnection messages mean? And what to check if all of the panels are offline. So starting with why a panel wouldn't connect to the software. This is going to overlap with a lot of other communications troubleshooting, so don't worry if you have your own methods and methodologies for doing that kind of thing, but hopefully this makes things a bit more clear. So the most common reason why a panel wouldn't connect is if the server IP and or the DNS name is not correctly in the panel. So you'll always want to confirm that the panel IP is set in the LCD, that the panel has DHCP or has a static address. And finally, you'll want to confirm in the system settings page in the software that the server address field is accurate. We'll go over that in a little more detail as well. The second most common reason is firewall. So the door controllers typically communicate on TCP and UDP 9876, and it's an outbound connection from the panel to the server. So that means we gotta make sure our inbound firewall rules are set for these ports. When we install Odyssey on a Windows PC, we are automatically going to add those exceptions for you. But if they are using a third-party app like McAfee, Norton, etc., you will need to get those rules added. DNS resolution can also be a common issue if the controllers are connecting with DNS names. So always worth double checking that the addresses resolve themselves either from a local PC or even a laptop or a cell phone on the same network to confirm that the address resolves correctly. And finally, our favorite, the panel physical connection. So this is of course confirming that the physical connections in the panel are correct, confirm the switches have link lights, are active, and then through the little LCD on the panel, confirm that the panel does have an IP address and is reachable on the network. This, of course, is still sort of, basic stuff. There are some sophisticated networks out there. We are, of course, working on the client's network most of the time, so there may be other things to consider, like MAC address filtering or internal network intrusion detection systems or other various aspects of the network. So, of course, you'll want to consult with their local IT or their third-party IT provider if you're unable to resolve it by looking at these things. Next, we're going to look at the various disconnection messages. You might have seen this already throughout the training, just to get you an idea of what some of these messages mean and what you may want to look at after you see them. So I'll start by saying that if a panel momentarily disconnects and reconnects, I wouldn't lose any sleep over it. Network blips happen all the time. The panel will disconnect on purpose if it sees bad packets or anything malformed. It's just going to play it safe and disconnect and reestablish that connection. So if we see a panel disconnect, as long as it connects within a reasonable amount of time, ideally a few moments, usually under 30 seconds, I typically wouldn't worry about that unless it's constantly happening. But yes, that brings our first message. Panel disconnected due to panel close connection. Basically means we purposely disconnected either because the network settings changed or the packets were malformed, and even in some cases the administrator can purposely disconnect it from the software. The next common disconnect message is panel disconnected due to timeout. As the name implies, it basically means that the panel or the server abruptly stopped communicating. This could be due to a physical issue like the network switch getting unplugged, the door controller losing power, a physical cable issue, or even a general network outage. If I see a timeout, I'm usually going to start looking at the physical layer and work my way up, as opposed to some of the other messages here. Our third one here is panel disconnected due to decryption error. This is a common one that you'll see very normal during the first update to a panel. When we send our first data to the controller during your first panel update, we do send the encryption keys with it, and once the panel gets that encryption keys, it is going to disconnect with the decryption error and then reconnect. If you see this in any other circumstance, it usually means the panel has encryption keys in it, which either belong to another panel or a server and need to be erased from the memory. So if we're moving a panel to a new database, for example, you will get a decryption error. So you will be required to physically access the panel and delete the encryption keys by using the erase flash memory command through the panel LCD interface. And our last message, not very common, is panel disconnected due to socket error on receive or socket error on send. This is normally a normal network error, typically due to faulty cabling, bad packets, or something along those lines. If you see this message, I would normally break out my cable tester and start ruling out, hey, is this the only panel doing it? Is it multiple panels doing it? So you can kind of get an idea if it's of an uplink cable that's having a problem or just the one going to that panel. If you've worked with any network troubleshooting on other devices like IP cameras, other IoTs, or even normal network and computer equipment, you may be familiar with the ISO layer. It's basically a way you can kind of move your way up the troubleshooting methodology, which best practice is to start the physical layer and move your way up. And on the physical layer, that's usually confirming, physical connections to the network. Is the panel powered up? Is the switch connected? Do we see link lights? Above that, we have the transport or network layer. That's where we're going to make sure that, the controller is getting DHCP, it has an IP address, is the server reachable from the panel. And then moving up, we get to the session layer. That's things like ports, firewalls. If network address translation or NAT is involved, it'll usually sit at that layer. So that's things like, again, firewall being open on those ports. And if they're going over the internet, is, port forwarding working properly or set. And finally, we have the application layer, aka Odyssey. So if the panel wasn't connecting and all these other layers are okay, it could be something like, the database is full and unable to take any more panels, but hopefully not the case. Next, we're going to bring you through, something most technicians run into at least once, and that's logging into a system or going to a service call where all the panels are offline. The first thing we'll usually do in that kind of situation is run a notifications report to see when the panel disconnected. That way we can check the message. And again, like we already addressed, if I see that it's a timeout, then I take that at face value and know, okay, I need to check the physical connections and see where things go from there. If the last message is the panel disconnected, then I may start looking at, IP settings, maybe see if the server IP has changed. And that brings us to point number 2. If everything's disconnected, regardless, you'll want to at least navigate to the system settings page within Odyssey, which is in the administrative section, and verify that the contents of the server address field matches the correct method for panels to connect. It's common to see situations where the IT for the end user forgot or neglected to set up a static IP on the server. And if the controllers are communicating over IP, if the server IP changes due to a DHCP lease being renewed, then you may see the panels disconnect. So you'll want to check this field, which is more than likely how the panels are communicating, and then verify that's correct with the customer, either by checking the network settings through Windows or through a command line prompt to verify whether that address is correct. And lastly, you want to navigate to the web UI of the panel to check its IP and the server address on that unit itself. And our last section here is for input, output, and reader troubleshooting. Thankfully, our documentation does contain very detailed troubleshooting chapter. You can get the documentation from the system section, and you can even search for it on the side nav bar. In a lot of cases for input and output related things, you can use the input, output, and reader test on the physical panel to help rule out things like troubleshooting. And we do strongly recommend using the divide and conquer methodology for troubleshooting. And again, this basically means that, if you have an issue, you're going to ideally try to divide it into easily digestible sections, change one piece at a time to help figure out what the issue is. For example, for troubleshooting a door strike, we may want to, test the voltage first at the panel side. If that looks okay, then we test on the strike side of things. And from there, then we might want to either, move the strike to the panel or replace the strike to kind of see where the issue lies. And of course, we do strongly recommend that you leverage the Hartman factory support for troubleshooting assistance if you need to go a bit further than that. And again, this is kind of surface level stuff. Obviously, if you're a technician, you're already experienced in different troubleshooting methodologies and best practices. If you did want to see more detail on troubleshooting the aspects I mentioned and much more, like I mentioned, there is a shortcut in the software for the documentation. And once that's open, there is a chapter relatively late in the manual that you can find on the index or the table of contents called Troubleshooting in Odyssey. And it's going to cover various things like the LCDs, software installation, any issues with troubleshooting the database side of things, input, output, and peripheral troubleshooting, access denied, and much more. So we can take a look at this chapter, and again, it's going to cover things like software being installed, some other kind of unique or special circumstances. And again, a little more detail than I provided here as far as troubleshooting communication and some tools and techniques for looking into that. I hope this section was helpful for you.